Bob Shrum, the director of the Center for the Political Future at USC Dornsife. In a few minutes, Mike Murphy, the center's co-director, will join us. He's having technical difficulties right now. But welcome to the first event of this academic year. We are fortunate to have 5 superb fellows who will be leading study groups this semester. Today, you'll meet them. Jeff Blattner is a Special Assistant Attorney General for Colorado. He was a law clerk for Associate Justice Potter Stewart of the U.S. Supreme Court. He worked for Justices Sandra Day O'Connor, William Brennan, Harry Blackmun, and Lewis Powell. He served on Senator Edward Kennedy's staff on the Senate Judiciary Committee and focused on the confirmation of judicial nominees. Mike Bonin is a progressive leader with more than 25 years of experience in Los Angeles government, politics, and public service. As a member of the LA City Council from 2013 to 2022, he led on issues of homelessness and affordable housing. If I can add, he led rather bravely on those, tenant protection, transportation, reimagining public safety, and local responses to climate change. Jane Coaston is a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, previously the host of the Opinion Section's podcast, The Argument, and senior political reporter at Vox with a focus on conservatism and the GOP. Lea Endres is an entrepreneur, educator, and human rights advocate. She currently serves on the board of the Center for Humane Technology. She was a founding board member of the Dream Corps and served in that capacity for nearly a decade. Carissa Smith is an award-winning strategist in politics, government relations, and public engagement. She currently serves as the Vice President of Government Relations for the Fox Corporation and previously served as Senior Advisor of Public Engagement for Women and Girls and Health in the Biden White House and as the National Women's Vote Director for the Biden campaign in 2020. As you might suspect, our discussion today will focus a little bit on what's about to happen in a few hours, the debate between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. So let me start with this question. Polls show that most voters know how they feel about Donald Trump one way or another, but many have yet to form an opinion on Kamala Harris. What does she have to do in tonight's debate to be successful? And Jane, you want to start?
Yeah, I think that what she needs to do is, I mean, it's funny to be talking about this because I think that we're in the midst of an election in which, and I understand how Democrats feel about this, in which it seems like, well, there's one person who keeps ranting and raving about the 2020 election he lost and attempted a coup, and there's another person who didn't do any of that. So it seems pretty obvious. But I think for a lot of voters, what they want to hear is like, what is Kamala Harris going to do for me, going to do for the country, a forward-looking approach? I think that focusing on the issues as much as she can, it's again, we are dealing with a debate with Donald Trump, so there's like a decent chance this is going to go off the rails within the first 8 minutes. Like I vaguely remember the 2020 debate, and it was unhinged. So I think as much as she can, focusing on the economy, focusing on issues that matter to voters. Because what I'm hearing when you look at the polling is that people are like, I know she's vice president, but being vice president isn't really that big a role unless you're Spiro Agnew. So I think that being able to talk about what she wants to do, what she wants to think about moving forward, having a forward-looking candidacy that isn't based on 2020 relitigation, I think that's going to be really important.
Jeff?
So first, I agree with Jane completely. I think, and I'm from Western Pennsylvania, where every candidate seems to be spending all their spare time. And I feel like explaining to folks there and in similar places, rural and urban, around the country, how President Harris is going to make their lives better, give their children opportunity, give them hope for the future. That's job one. That is the most important thing. I think the second thing for any new candidate on the stage, and she is new in the sense that, as you were saying, people don't really know what she's done as vice president. There's a hurdle to overcome. Can she be president? Ronald Reagan crossed that hurdle in the debate with Jimmy Carter, and the polls kind of opened up. I think if she can make that sale, she could see a similar vote, a similar bump in the polling.
Mike, we're just going to go around the horn here.
So I think there's two things that she needs to do. One, I think the most important is I think she needs to talk very tangibly about what people are genuinely worried about. I think it's not just enough to say she's for the middle class or that she cares about the economy. I think she needs to talk about the struggles that people are facing paying for childcare. I think she needs to talk about the vulnerability that renters have to eviction. I think she needs to talk about the fear that every parent in the country has right now that when their kids go to school, they might get shot at school. I think she needs to talk about those real kitchen table issues, the things that keep people up at night. Because Trump won't. He'll talk about himself. She needs to talk about what people out there care about. The other thing I think she needs to do is Trump will be attacking her and Biden and Democrats relentlessly on their record. And I think that her challenge is going to be deflecting those attacks without capitulating and not defending what Democrats stand for. So if he attacks her on her position on defunding, I don't think she needs to outflank him as being pro law enforcement. I think she needs to stand up and say, what the hell are you talking about? We haven't defunded the police. We've defunded housing and we've defunded healthcare and we've defunded childcare in this country. And those are the things we need to invest in.
Lea?
Great. Yeah, I think folks have really covered it, but I'll just add, for me, I really want to see the contrast of character. I mean, this is an opportunity for her to show that who she is, being unruffled by whatever might come from Donald Trump, and really show her leadership and that it is in fact presidential. So I'm really looking forward to, I think, just very simply put, the contrast of character.
Carissa, and given what you did in the White House, what kind of role do you think reproductive rights might play in this debate?
Well, I think it has been playing a huge role in the voter trends that we're seeing. And I do want to take note is that I recently wrapped up serving as an advisor to Minyan Moore for the Democratic National Convention. So I was on the ground for more than a month working behind the scenes on political strategy and outreach related to just this. What exactly was the message that we were trying to convey with introducing Vice President Kamala Harris to voters, to key constituencies during this time? And even with the 29 million viewers that tuned into her speech, there was still a hurdle that we had to essentially clear when it came to who she is, what she has done. We saw from the inside out that there was still a level of unawareness of her record, unawareness based on the misinformation, unawareness of what she did as AG, right? And so even for her to step into with a very short, narrow, I think, runway to get ahead of America, you know, for the DNC speech, we had to really work to not only line up a convention that added talkers, that added supporters, but also included key constituencies that speak to those very issues where voters are unfamiliar with her. With the short window of this announcement of her becoming the nominee, I know, you know, as we have seen, she has really been on the ground running, hitting these swing states. She has been, you know, crisscrossing to these key constituencies, especially as it relates to Pennsylvania, especially as it relates to Georgia, especially as it relates even some outreach related to reproductive rights in Florida. They just launched a reproductive freedom tour in Florida on the ground, essentially in the Republican Party's backyard, right? In a sense where they have traditionally held strongholds. And so it's interesting to see that that her team and her are just taking a key approach to make sure that the messaging is solidified, but also that they have key constituencies and surrogates on the ground telling this message. So to the larger point, reproductive rights, I believe, plays a huge role in this voter trend. But I think it even goes to her having to debunk what people feel as though about inflation and the economy, right, related to the Biden-Harris administration. What does she feel about when it comes to policing? What does she feel when it comes to immigration? These are key issues that are on the top of mind for people at their kitchen tables. This is being discussed amongst not only nuclear families, but also larger community gatherings, is that people want to know where she stands. And I think with these next couple of weeks, that is going to be key and top priority for her, is to really come out strong, even in this debate of where she stands and that there is no faltering on her positions.
Yeah, Mike Murphy has now joined us, and I'm going to ask a question about Donald Trump to balance off this initial discussion, and then he can probably weigh in on that And I suspect he'll have some more questions about Vice President Harris as well. Look, Donald Trump has a very solid base inside the Republican Party, but he hasn't done much to reach out to independents. He seems to have a particular problem with younger voters, women, especially in the suburbs, and people of color. What can he do, if anything, to appeal tonight beyond his base voters? And is there much chance he'll do it? Anybody who wants to start with that can. Come on,
I'll
somebody.
weigh in, I guess. And sorry I'm late to join. I had well, I just want to address the Kamala thing for a minute. This debate is not about Trump, it's about her. Trump is highly defined. She is not. That's both a huge vulnerability and it's a huge potential upside. So yeah, this thing is a stalemate, and she can break through it if she convinced a third of the country that don't know much about her, if anything, that she's the way forward. It's interesting. I got a hold of some of the secret dial testing this morning on her convention speech, which is where a political thing where we hook a bunch of voters up to jumper cables and they watch the speech and they turn knobs and rate it. There's even a technology now where your iPhone watches your facial expressions and analyzes it in real time. So what those said was she did a great job with the speech, but there's one thing voters hated, absolutely hated. The lines all dropped when she talked about Trump. They get Trump. They know what they think of Trump. Not about Trump. It's about her. So if Trump can define her tonight, he's going to win. If she can define herself and kind of live above Trump, she's going to do well. So as far as Bob's question about will Trump reach out to independents, will he do anything strategic? No, he's Trump. He will try to destroy her. He will try to define her in a negative way. And if he succeeds, it's going to be a very good night for him. So a lot of this, I think, is tactical in how you use television, not to, with the serial high-speed liar, try to refute things point by point. You can't do it with Trump. A Trump riff will be, you know, she was in charge of the border to protect the drug ring her sister runs, which is why she murdered that guy in Cleveland. Everybody knows that was covered up. Now, you start refuting that stuff, you just amplify. So I think this is not a point counterpoint debate with scorekeeping. This is can she connect to the country and explain her motive and her vision for the future or not, or will his interference deny her that? So I don't think any of the typical political calculation about independent soccer moms and all that's not a language Trump understands. He understands destroy her and with repeated attacks, and that's what he'll try to do. I think the more she ignores him, the better. He's etched in stone. She is not.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this before Mike asks the question?
I would also just
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to comment on that too, as I was interestingly reading a poll by the New York Times and Siena this morning. And what's interesting, we're also just seeing, I think, a resurgence of a similar narrative that surrounds former President Trump, is that he kind of represents this change. And they did a poll, and it said that 25% of likely voters said that Harris represents a major change, whereas compared to Trump, they said that 53% of voters see that. And I think some of that has just been that he has stuck to your point and defined that messaging of, like, you know, the swamp, I represent something new, I'm an outsider of politics, let's, like, you know, clear what has already been done. And that has still remained etched in voters' mind. And I think also, to your point when related to her, is that she is attached to the Biden-Harris presidency. So how does she define herself outside of Biden, and what does that really look like? And tonight is the grand moment for her to do that. What is the change that she is going to bring to this nation, and of course, as our president?
So how does she separate herself from Biden? It's a very delicate operation to do that, I think. Are there smart ways to do it without offending him or those who still in the Democratic Party are strongly positive about his presidency?
As you say, I think it's a very delicate question, but I think she can say, look, I was the last person in the room with President Biden when he made some of his key decisions. We didn't always agree, but those conversations are between him and me. I'm talking about the future, and here's what I'm going to do as president, and then kind of go to the vision that Mike was just talking about and the programs that I think are proving to be pretty popular. Not all of them, but certainly many of them are proving to be quite popular. But to just pivot to the future.
Yeah, I also think that the question isn't about her relationship with Biden. Trump is popular because he expresses this popular outrage and channels people's frustrations with a system that they feel is broken. Trump defines Biden as the symbol of that system. I think her job is to reframe that and define that the system that is screwing people over is pharmaceutical companies, is corporate landlords, is this billionaire class that Trump is part of that is trying to leech itself off of society. People are being screwed by institutions, and her job, I think, is to define what those are, because she has a track record fighting for consumers, for instance, where she has taken that on. And I think that's a winning message.
Anyone else before
I
we go
think
ahead,
that-
Jane?
I think something that's also important to remember is that Trump is really leaning on this idea. He has a conceit of 2016 that he didn't need to go wide, he needed to go deep with his own base. Base, when we talk about the base, we are talking about the people who will like buy the merchandise and go to the concert, not people who just listen to an album. His understanding of 2016 is that everybody loves me, and that some people loves me more than anybody else, and I need those people. That's why he selected JD Vance. That's why he's leaning in on literally every, like all of like weirdo right, freak right, which is a term that people are using online, even everything online. That's why he's leaning into it. And so I think that if there's a means by which you can emphasize the degree to which he is not going to be a president for everybody, that he has decided he doesn't want to be, like, let's keep in mind that 2016 was, the difference was about 75,000 votes. It wasn't about like, this grand story, 75,000 votes in about 3 states. And so I think like really emphasizing the degree to which Trump has written off millions of Americans. And we've seen that happen with the Trumpist candidates. We remember Carrie Lake did in Arizona, literally saying we don't need McCain voters in Arizona. We saw it with Doug Mastriano. We saw it with Tudor Dixon. We see it in Colorado. We see it in basically every state where you see Trumpists attempting to run. So I think really talking about like, he doesn't want to talk to the rest of the country. He doesn't care about the rest of the country. He doesn't care about women in general as people. And so I think emphasizing that the relationship moving forward with the president, I think Kamala Harris should emphasize, like, she talked about being a president for everyone and we're moving forward. And I think that making that contrast more abrupt would be helpful.
Leah, you have anything to add?
I do, but not about this specifically. I think one thing I'm really focused on, didn't mention this earlier, but NationBuilder is fiercely nonpartisan. So we work with folks of all stripes and all different countries. And I think the thing that I've been really focused on beyond just the debate itself is the work that Michelle Obama referenced at the convention. Like, what is it going to actually look like to organize and mobilize people after the debate with the remaining time that folks have, in particular on the Democratic Party side? So I'll keep those thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts, but not specifically about the debate. Thanks, Bob.
Mike, I'm going to turn the next question over to you.
Okay, thanks, Bob. So, we pay too much attention to these polls where the margin of error moves around, and we treat that like big seismic movement. But most polls have trended in general direction a bit down for her since the convention. It's still a very tight race. The narrative that's getting some traction against her, and you saw that New York Times Siena, is liberal, which is becoming a big definition. Hard to get suburban Republicans if you're defined as a progressive candidate. And 2, the idea of serial flip-flopper, because she is trying to move to the center from her kind of left of Biden primary campaign. How would you handle that? Because the problem with the flip-flopping issue is over time it becomes a character issue. You become a cynical politician. On the other hand, if she doesn't get to the center, I don't know if she'll put the numbers together. She needs to really get Trump in those 6 key, or you can argue 7 key states. So the flip-flop issue, it'll be a big part of tonight. She was a little defensive at CNN about it. What do we think she should do? Or what would you tell her to do? We may have disagreement. And why don't we start with Jeff?
Hard question, agreed. I think, relating how she's learned. I mean, we all grow, we all learn, we all hopefully learn from our, experiences. And so You know, I've seen that. I mean, there are hard issues. Fracking, probably in Western Pennsylvania, a brutally hard one for her, given where the votes are. But I think she has to say more broadly, you know, I've been in the Situation Room when situations were breaking down, and I've learned, you know, from those experiences. We live in a real world. We have to be tough-minded about America's energy security. You pivot through experiences. I think we can all relate to that. It isn't the strongest ground possible, but you know, I think it's the best you can do practically.
Mike, you've been on the ballot. You know what life is like in practical politics. What would you tell her to do about the flip-flop attack?
Well, I think on the flip-flop attack, I think you turn that right back at them very, very quickly. I think she sticks with her message that her values haven't changed and say, my opponents are the flip-floppers in this race. How many different positions has Donald Trump had in the past week and a half on abortion or IVF? Look at how Vance has changed his position from thinking Trump was Hitler to having his lips on his ass. I think you frame it that way. And then I think her answer at CNN was smart in that she said that her values have not changed. And talk about what her values are. Her values are that we should have a government, whatever label you attach to a party, we should have a government that is standing up to make sure that kids aren't shot at school. We should have a government that is making sure that working families can afford a home. We should have a government that is making sure that parents can afford childcare in this country. And I think that's where you stick to the message, stick to values, stick to what matters to people.
Yeah, I think there's a play they can run that combines both those things, which is when you're vice president, you see everything. So I have learned experience, and that I think I've evolved to some better positions. On the other hand, my opponents flip-flop every day for political expediency. They do it for cynicism. I do it for what's good for the country. But what do we think, ladies? Jane, what would you tell her to do? Because she's going to hear it tonight.
I mean, I think that as much as you can avoid getting into a weird back and forth with him, unless it has to do with, because like, let's keep in mind that Donald Trump is not the same Donald Trump of 8 years ago. He is doing like, this is not going to be the same conversation he had 4 years ago or 8 years ago. And so I really think like avoiding getting like locked in on this, on any particular like back and forth with him, but staying focused on the issues. And among those issues are, you know, choice and abortion, especially because Trump went back and forth on abortion in the state of Florida twice last week. Like where he stands on specific issues is really, I mean, it's the like yes and game that you do if you're a dorky theater kid. Like, I think that there's a sense to me that avoiding a back and forth is good, but staying focused on the issues and staying focused on an issue in which Trump is convinced that people don't actually care about abortion. And then the people who care about abortion in every direction keep saying, we absolutely do. And so I think that like, yeah, I think that that's really the emphasis. Like, don't go into a weird back and forth. Just stay focused on the issues. It just so happens that I think that Kamala Harris on specific issues can take the better of him.
I also just add, I feel like there's a piece here around what leadership is. Leadership is listening to people, and it's learning, and it's evolving your position. So there's something really powerful to own, like was just said, and I think Mike said, about the experience that she had as vice president and what rooms that she was in, and thus her positions have evolved. And for the record, I think that's a message to everybody, not just for Kamala or the debate tonight, but actually embracing what it means to be a leader, and that you have to evolve your position based on data and facts and learning and listening.
Yeah, you know, the greatest flip-flopper in history was Winston Churchill, had the best line ever. When the facts change, I changed my mind. What do you do?
That's right.
Carissa, you want to do cleanup on this? I would say, I think it won't be Trump will call her flip-flopper, but this is where the moderators are going to be aggressive.
Right. I mean, I think just to round out us discussing maybe some things she could, stand on for tonight is to really just come out there with direct messaging of where she stands now. I think if there's a prompt or if there's a question about her stances and what they were in the past, I think Jeff hit it right on, is that she can show this scope of evolving. She can show growing into the role. She's never been vice president before up until this moment. And I think anyone who knows or has been elected into office or worked with even legislators or been on the staff side, we all know that our a congressman day one is not who they are when they leave Congress and when they retire, right? And that to me is something maybe she can lean into, is to show what her evolution has looked like in her political career based on the trends, based on legislation, based on as times are changing. And I do think that there is messaging that she's pointing towards when it comes to leaning back towards the center, because I think she recognizes is that in the center, she does need independent voters. In the she does need centered voters to help her win ultimately in November. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out overall, as she is also, I think, shoring up some of these other constituencies, especially related to younger voters, more diverse voters, more intersectional voters. I think that there is a way for her to coexist her messaging to be a candidate for all voters. I think Jane hit it on the nose when it comes to President Trump, is that he goes deep with his base. He knows where his base is. He affirms his base. He tells his base how he's a fan of them. And voters like to hear that you like them, right? And I think Trump over the years has done a really good job in making his voters feel loved and feel affirmed in what they believe. So he has been consistent in that. And I don't imagine that tonight he will deviate from that as well.
Let me talk about something else with respect to the moderators. They're certainly going to ask Donald Trump about his legal problems. What kind of role is that likely to play? And, Vice President Harris, when she was asked about it recently, said something like, that's for the courts to decide. The voters have their own work to do in November. Is that a sufficient answer, or should she pounce on him once that question is asked? Jeff, you're our legal, so you can start off.
Well, I think I liked her answer to that, honestly. I don't think the voters want the courts to decide this election. I mean, they may after the election, and we can get into that if you want. But I think it's about voters' lives and not the criminal justice system. So I thought she would actually hit that quite well. The crazy thing is you've got a couple of cases going on now. One where the judge said, I'm going to postpone sentencing until after the election. That's the New York hush money case. And the other one where the judge said, I'm going to pay no attention to the election. That's the DC January 6th federal case. And they're both right. They both sound neutral on their face. But I think the voters want to hear about the future. And the subtext about Trump and his criminal problems is going to be abundant between now and November 5th, but it doesn't have to come from Vice President Harris.
Jane, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I just also think, discussing Trump's legal stuff, it's more like in any way more specific than this person is unqualified and remember the last time he lost an election, I think is a mistake. It just really, at a certain point, I think that, the hardest thing about this conversation and the hardest thing about people who care a lot about politics having these conversations is that we actually have no idea what most voters think about. I encounter voters and talk to people all the time who genuinely could not tell you who their senator is, who the representative is, any specifics. You're just and you think about it for a minute and you're like, why would you? To a baseline level, you don't, most people want a version of politics in which their participation is not mandatory. And so I think that anything getting into the specifics of the legal wrangling, it's just you're going to lose people. Not that it's not important, but I think that the people who care about it so much that they may have convinced themselves that other people care about it too. And there are a host of issues like this. When you look at what people actually are caring about, they're talking about the economy, they're talking about some specific issues. And then you see people who are actually, what everyone wants to talk about happens to be the thing that I majored in college. That's just not how it works.
Listen, is this already baked in, Carissa? People know about Trump. Every time he's been indicted, you see the procession of cars headed in for him to get fingerprinted and get a mugshot. Is this a big factor in the debate or in the election?
I will be honest. I have been using the youth voters and the polling and the trends related to our youth because they are the next largest bloc that will be voting for the first time in their lives. And honestly, we are not seeing trends from what the polls are showing that shows that it's a big deal to them. What's a big deal to them is some of the things that even Mike outlined. It's like, we want to be safe when we go to school. We want to know that we can afford a livelihood. We want to know that we can set up shop for our families. We want to know that we could possibly become entrepreneurs and thrive. We want to know that our healthcare is protected. You rarely hear people talk about the sentencing or what the charges are against former President Trump, because for them, it's just not a close enough of proximity. I should say it's not in close proximity to them and what they're feeling at their kitchen tables. I think for the most part, she is really going to have to tell voters, she's gonna have to introduce herself as like, how am I going to improve your kitchen table? What do those issues look like at your kitchen table? And how can I be the best person to represent you as governing America? And I think overall, that is to me where she should really stick to in her messaging, and also just go with what is this change that I will bring, especially related to the establishment. I think, like I said, it's going to be a line for her to have to essentially draw and to show her evolution, but also I think still engage and talk to those voters as well. Voters like to hear that they're liked. They don't want to be left apart. And so I think overall, it's not a big deal from what I'm seeing, especially with young voters. And it's not a big deal across the board in most trends in polling. And I'm sure others may have thoughts or, commentary on that on this call, but I have not seen that was a major messaging thing that people wanted to hear about and voters are really caring about.
Yeah, it's a little stunning in the sense that you have the first indicted ex-president of the United States. And we're all sort of agreeing, or all of you are agreeing, that, yeah, that's not such a big factor in this election. Mike or Lea, do you dissent?
No, I don't dissent, but I think for me, it's about Mike's point earlier. Mike talked about how everybody knows Trump. People still need to define their opinion of Kamala Harris. It's a 90-minute debate. Subtract time for Trump talking, for transitions, for questions. She's got probably 38 minutes to tell her story and to fill in the gaps. And I wouldn't waste a second of that on something that has been covered ad nauseum and everybody has an opinion on and knows about. I would focus on defining herself and her agenda. Just a matter of strategy and time.
I agree.
Doesn't she
completely,
need a
Mike.
one-liner, Lea? Just,
I was just going to say, I agree completely with Mike. And frankly, people also choose to believe what they want to believe. So if folks have already written that off, then why waste time on it?
Yeah, I'm going to turn this over to Mike again, but I think personally that her answer the other day was superb when she said, let's let the courts, the judicial system take care of this, and let's let the voters take care of business in November. Mike, next question.
If you can pick the candidate, Kamala or the Donald. If you're their campaign person, what strength for tonight are you most confident in, and what weakness are you most worried about?
If I'm Harris, I'm really confident in the fact that she will not go on a 19-minute long tangent about sharks or electricity or the movie Bloodsport, or like just the fact that like, if you tell her to say something, or if she says something, she will just say it. She will not wander off. Like, I think one of my favorite moments of the Republican National Convention was Nate Silver being like, okay, the first 10 minutes of his speech, great. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Because now, I mean, the Times has pointed this out, we're in a position in which the age issue has been completely reversed. Like, I think it was always kind of bullshit for people to pretend like Trump isn't old. And the idea that somehow his 78 is different than everybody else's 78. But I think that if I'm Harris's team, I'm feeling pretty confident about the fact that like there is some level of direction she will take. That is not true for Trump. I think if you're Trump's team, you're assuming that whatever it is that his thing is, that he can just keep doing that. But I think that, again, what people forgot from the first debate, because Biden did so poorly, is that it's not like Trump did well. It was just like a weird conversation about golf and who knows. But like, I think that if you're Harris's team, you're aware like no one has ever been able to tell Trump what to do. It's just never happened. And I think that if you're Harris's team, you feel pretty good about the fact that like she's not going to talk about sharks or Hannibal Lecter.
What are you worried about?
If I'm,
Weakness.
I think that the challenge will be that there are going to be everything that Harris says is going to be dissected in such a way that I think is weird. Like the whole Trump being Trump thing means that like Trump gets away with things that just he gets sane washed in a way that other people don't. We know that. And so I think that what Harris needs to do, what I'd be worried about is just like, how will things that you think sound great and she thinks sound great be perceived by people who already don't like her? That's just the environment we're in. Like you're going to see a bunch of like right-wing folks tonight trying to be theater critics, which is the weirdest thing in the world when you're walking into the theater art and you already hate it. So but I do think like they are going to be worried about her sounding confused, about her sounding like she's too rehearsed, which is again a weird thing to be worried about because, you know, if she didn't sound rehearsed enough, you'd be mad at her too. But I do think like there's some concern about how she will be perceived.
Okay, anybody else want to do?
Yeah, two things. One, if I were Trump's people, I'd be worried about legal fees, but I'd also be worried that like the racism or sexism is just going to spill out in some moment. Honestly, I think some of the suspense tonight is trying to figure out what he's saying and doing when the mic is allegedly muted. I'm not sure he'll be able to contain himself. With her, I think she's got to resist being pinned down in places where the activist base is super tied to something that may scare off some middle American voters. Court packing is polls under 50%, but it's obviously a big issue for the base. There are a couple of others that are like that, and I think it's important that, as others were suggesting, that she kind of keep this at a general, more value-focused, future-oriented message.
If I were on Team Kamala, I would be supremely confident that she will do something that Biden did not do in the first debate, which is seize an opening and insert the point she needs to make. What I'd be concerned about is her being asked about some California issues like Proposition 36, the criminal justice one, or about the reparations bill in the California legislature. I think those are ones that can really sort of put her in an uncomfortable position. If I were Trump's folks, I'd be supremely confident that he is going to describe her as a nasty woman, and I would be extremely worried that he's going to describe her as being a nasty woman.
Lea?
I think that was well said. I'll leave it there.
Okay. Carissa, anything to add?
No, I agree and echo a lot of the sentiments already the other fellows have shared. I mean, I really think overall, you know, we can expect what we can expect from President Trump. And I do think that with saying that that can also be his his weakness tonight. I think on the other hand, with Vice President Harris, we will see that she is probably really going to stick to her messaging, hopefully, and really nail down the record and also just stick to introducing herself on these issues and matters that she will be prompted to answer. So I look forward to seeing how this plays out. I mean, this is the first time we all get to witness both of them go toe to toe or head to head, whatever. And so I'm actually just also keeping an open mind to the possibilities. We saw what the last debate did, and we ended up with a whole different election or a different Democratic nominee. And so I'm also just open to the unseen of what can occur from this.
What do you two think, Bob and Mike, about that question? I mean, that's a really tough question.
Yeah.
Mike, you want to go first or I'll go first? I don't care.
You go, Bob.
I think that what I would worry most about with Harris is that he'll distract her, that she'll be drawn in to a kind of point-by-point attempt to refute him. I think that what she needs to do is take a moment, not every moment, but take a moment and say, you know, almost everything he said in this debate is a lie. He just told another lie. Refute the lie, and then pivot and go on and go back to her own message. So I think that for her would be the right way forward. if I were Trump's people, I mean, Mike knows better than I do. I don't think somebody said this earlier. I don't think he listens to people. I think that first 10 minutes of his convention speech, and I'm stealing this line from Mike from an event we did last night, but I think he looked out and said, "Oh my, the crowd isn't responding to my, this attempt to remake me as someone who was almost assassinated and who now has a different view of the world." And
yeah, you could see it. You could see him just start being like, "Nope, nope, nope, don't want to do it. Don't want to be normal."
And that's what I would be most worried about, Mike.
Well, if I were the Trump people, I'd be drunk because he doesn't take any, there's no campaign manager. There's a snake pit of people fighting over money, different flavors of yes man, all trying to stab each other. Nobody, Trump does whatever he wants. But if I could put a shock collar on him or something and try to get him to behave, all I want him to do is say, while you're watching this, right after this debate, go get all your bills. See how much more everything costs now. Think about what it was like when I was president. You're a lot better off now. Everything in your life is more expensive. The border is wide open, and we can't afford the Biden-Harris economic plan to ruin what's left of the country. They're too weak, they're too liberal, and they hit you right in the pocketbook. Don't look at me, look at your bills. And I just repeat that 17 times. Border, 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 inflation, inflation, cost of life. Don't trust the rhetoric. Look at the dollars. But I don't think he'll do a bad version of that, but I don't think he'll be that disciplined. What I'd worry about is, and this is the only button push, I think she ought to mostly ignore him like a toddler. Donald needs a timeout, so let me talk to you about, et cetera, et cetera. But she could push his button by just saying he still doesn't understand that he lost the election fair and square. That is because he believes it was robbed. That's how his behavior is motivated. He's in an alternative reality universe in his crazy head. So he could go off for 7 minutes on the votes were all printed on secret paper, and he could really go off into crazy world and people just stare at him. I've got enough of this. I'm exhausted. With her, she's defensive. She doesn't do the flip-flop thing. She doesn't like to admit she was wrong. She has to admit growth. She has to retreat. She has to be like a skyscraper that can move in an earthquake rather than just getting rigid and falling over. And there was a little bit of that in Dana Bash. She got better in the second half, but they need to do a little software adjustment on her for that because it's a big weakness. The other thing is when she's mad, she starts sounding like a very rich lady who's mad at a waiter. I don't know why. It's kind of a Seinfeld thing. And don't get mad. The key to debates is have a good time. Be relaxed. If you're relaxed at home, they love you because it's only politics. To them, it's all a reality show now, which is the great tragedy of our democracy. So the more Donald is an object of ridicule, and those of us in the real world, and use the camera to connect to those people, the better she's going to do. There's no, the biggest things, I've trained a lot of candidates for a lot of debates, so has Bob. The reason good debate training, the bad debate training is the staff that hates the candidate has a chance to sit down in the living room and bark questions at him. You're not ready. We have to ask tough questions. Why are you ugly? And the candidates hate the staff, and it just spirals into craziness. What I always would do is build an exact replica. I do a lot of short debate preps, and everybody says, well, you got to get a really mean litigator to play No, I would get a tax attorney with a photographic memory because everything the other person has ever said is a record. They all have the same answer on the 20 questions. They're the only questions. And I'd get the candidate super familiar with the other candidate's act. So they're never surprised on stage. They never say, God, that was a great answer. I'm screwed. I'm going to lose. My wife's going to leave me. I'm a national laughingstock. They got to have confidence. They have to be relaxed. So she ought to play her game and not over listen to Trump. I don't think this is a debate where the clever comeback line is the key to everything. If there's an organic one, because most of them are canned and awful, some staff idiot wrote it, and like, just tell them you're louder than a broken muffler. That'll turn everything around. No, it won't. Be relaxed, natural, live in the moment, and convince them you're the future. So I think she can do that. If she gets in a defensive crouch because she thinks she's not that great off script, she needs to relax. That would worry me on their side, that she digs in. And well, I'm for fracking. That's all I got to tell you. not as vice president, you see everything. I can even talk about the aliens at Roswell after the debate. And those facts change. I take a wider view. I've learned, and this is what I believe is good for the country. You know,
Okay,
blah, blah, always
yeah.
often.
One
Sorry for
last-
the long answer.
Yeah, that was a good answer. One last question about the debates. You know, certainly my experience, John Kerry in 2004 by the polling won all 3 debates and narrowly lost the election. Most debates, you could argue, presidential debates, have not affected the electoral outcome, possibly with the exception of 1960, which I think was critical for Kennedy, and 1980, arguably for Reagan. How much impact in terms of electoral outcome is this debate likely to have? And anyone can start. No guesses?
I think that we will tell ourselves it had more of an impact than it may actually have. Like, I think that there will be the story we tell about the election after the fact, in which we're like, oh, it all happened here. And I'm like, did it? Did it actually happen here? Like, I mean, it's the same thing that I think in 2016, you saw a lot of people pointing to the Comey letter. And I would love to go to like small town Wisconsin and see about the people who decided not to vote because of the James Comey letter. Like, I want to meet that one person. So I think that in the story we tell about the election, it'll have an impact, but I'm not sure how much it's going to actually matter in terms of how people actually vote.
Jane, I agree with you completely. I think that's spot on. And at the end of the day, that it is about the work and the organizing work in particular that happens afterwards. That's where I would put all of my money.
You know, in an election that could be decided by under 100,000 votes and a total in 7 states, everything is decisive and nothing is decisive, right? I mean, you know, any one factor. I think unless there's a big, you know, amazing goof, and that's very, very unlikely. It's what Lea just said. It's going to be grinding it out in the trenches, you know, vote by vote in these 7 states.
I'm contrarian on this. I normally take Bob's line, they're overrated. But she is unknown, which is incredible rocket fuel for her if she gets it right. It's also a weakness that could, remember, we just had the first debate in American presidential history that knocked an incumbent president out of the race. Never happened before. So a really bad debate, if you're vulnerable, is a really bad thing. So if she has a really bad night tonight and gets defined as the flower that wilted in front of Trump and weak and Biden too and everything, there are stakes tonight, man. Higher than normal, I would say, and more opportunity than normal. So I think it's a kind of an abnormal debate. But
What if
that's fair, Mike? And Mike Dukakis may well have lost in '88. I mean, he was cascading downward already because of the tank and other things. But that was a pretty bad moment for him.
Yeah, it's kind of a tie ball, and you know this is the big jump. And there's a minute left in the game. But if she can get the ball and have ball control, she's going to score a couple of times. And that'll put her where she needs to be to win this race. They don't really want Trump. They just don't really know who and what she is yet. And what they know about her isn't completely great yet. So she's got to move that needle.
Yeah, I'm a potential contrarian too, because I think there's a chance that, first, I agree with Mike. It's a big opportunity for her. It's also a big challenge for her to define herself. But secondly, I believe there's a chance that Donald Trump could go completely off the rails.
Yeah.
They're telling him not to, but I think he could. And I think that would have a big impact. You know, in 1980, we had, I think going into that debate, Reagan had about a 3-point lead. He ultimately won by 10 points. And there were 2 moments for Jimmy Carter that I think really hurt him. One was when he was asked about nuclear weapons. And he said he talked to his 11-year-old daughter, Amy, about what we should do about nuclear weapons. And I think people were just completely perplexed, while Reagan was reassuring people that he actually favored arms control. But then came the classic moment where he was attacked on Medicare and Social Security, and he did that, there you go again, which was not just about that issue. It was a way of saying, he's not telling the truth about me about anything. So I think there is a potential for this debate to have a very, very big impact. You know, anybody else want to weigh in? Okay, then I'm gonna. Mike, do you
Bob,
have
can I
another-
just say, I wanted to create space
Yes.
for other people, but just briefly, the thing that was so important, I think, about what Jane said is this idea of the story we tell ourselves about the debate, because there's what happened, and then there's the story that gets made up about what happened. And I'm just not convinced that everyone's going to share the same view of what actually occurred. So all to say, I think it's a really fair point, unknown, candidate, et cetera, and very, very unique debate. And I'm still going to put my money on the organizing afterwards, just to say.
Yeah, it could have a huge audience. I mean, I don't think you can trust the polling completely on this, but there was a survey out this morning that said 74% of people say they're going to watch the debate. I mean, that would be unprecedented. You'd actually break the 1960 record on how many people watched the debate.
Of course, the sad irony is we could black out debate coverage in California, Texas, New York, Massachusetts, and it wouldn't mean a thing. This is really about 6, maybe 7 states with a remarkably small number of people in each state. It's just what the Electoral College has brought us in the modern era. So, basically 1 out of every 300,000 Americans, well, I'll go wider. 1 out of every 30,000 Americans has a meaningful outcome voice probably in this.
Yeah, well, let's talk about it, and then I want to get you to talk a bit about your study groups. But let's talk about those 6 or 7 states. They seem, in most of the polling, to be within a margin of error. Which battleground states are you watching the most closely? Why? Do you think Pennsylvania really is the tipping point state?
Is it okay if I go?
Of course it is.
So I'm actually really interested in North Carolina, because North Carolina could be, I have a thesis. I try not to go on this with a thesis, but I think that one of the challenges Trump faces is that all of the people who he has, there's that book, Everything Trump Touches Dies, which is, I think, sometimes true. But let's keep in mind that he has endorsed Mark Robinson, the current lieutenant governor, for governor. And Mark Robinson is, if I may say, batshit insane. This is someone who said that the Black Panther movie was being used by Jews to try and get money out of Black people. This is someone who said that abortions happen because women can't keep their skirts down. This is someone who basically wants to hunt and fight LGBT people. And you see his numbers are bad, because of course they are. We have seen in a couple of races, we saw in 2022, in which Democrats won, not necessarily because they were amazing candidates, even though many of them were, but because they were going up against the craziest person on earth, Doug Mastriano, for example, in Pennsylvania. And so I will be interested to see if if people who see Trump endorsing Mark Robinson and saying that he's Martin Luther King on steroids, I think he actually said, are absolutely not. Trumpism doesn't work for anyone else but Trump, because somehow Trump has celebrity and a history, and everyone who tries to imitate him doesn't take on populism, as you hear from some people on the populist right. They take on being insane. And so I'm going to be really interested to see what happens in North Carolina.
Someone else? Jeff, you're from Western Pennsylvania. You think
Yeah,
Pennsylvania is...
I'm gonna go for the trifecta. I want to know what the Latino vote in Nevada, the Black vote in Georgia, and the white rural vote in the Rust Belt looks like. I think she has opportunities in all 3 places to move the needle, and I don't view those as either or choices. I think a broad future oriented message to help working families can help with all 3.
If no one else is going to weigh in on this, then I'm going to ask Carissa, did you want to?
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, Jane, thank you for giving me flashbacks of the candidate Herschel Walker, since I am here in Georgia. And I just,
Yeah.
out. And that really was, I think, the Republicans Party biggest downfall was the quality of candidates that they ran that cycle. And I do think, to your point, that Trumpism
Blake
is
Masters, come on.
I do not think that the Trumpism effect, as they have seen, I wouldn't repeat that same mistake this cycle, not investing, I think, in good candidates that are actually viable to win. But also on that note, I do think I agree with you, Jeff, that she does, to me, have a lot of ground game that she could potentially pick up. Some other things I see is that just the organizing power on the ground doesn't seem to be felt from the Trump operation. There's been numerous articles talking about their door knocking, their voter engagement. So some of that too seems to also be playing a role, just also in the resources that they are deploying in these swing states. Like I said, I'm here in Georgia, and I'm definitely seeing an organizing apparatus on the ground in parts of Georgia that I did not expect for the Harris-Walz campaign. And I'm interested to see exactly how they may plan to kick up their organizing or outreach efforts in these key states that are within the margin of error and can make or break it for the Trump campaign. So those are just my thoughts on that.
I can't resist being a contrarian a little. I'm a message guy, so I'm organization. When the message is right, organization is an amplifier. On its own, it doesn't do a lot. So if she can message well, it can be a value added, and that's what tonight is possibly about. We're going to find out. She was kind of like the inert object lifted up by the tornado in Twister, because there was such joy Biden wasn't running. So it grabbed her, and she didn't really have an engine, and put her into the atmosphere. And she's done an okay job managing that, which is hard. But the Twister's going away now. She's going to fly on her own, and we're going to learn a lot tonight. I'm watching Georgia because I think she's in trouble in Pennsylvania. I think she's underperforming. I think Michigan, my home state where I've done a lot of races, she's going to have some resistance there too. And Nevada and Arizona don't look great, although she's in the hunt. She's doing scores better than Biden. Georgia is her Pennsylvania insurance. And because if you can get African-American voter share up to the low 30s, and you hold your suburbanites in the Atlanta multiplex and a little piece of Savannah, she can win Georgia. And then that makes up for trouble in the metal bending states, be it Michigan or Pennsylvania. And finally, I live in Los Angeles, so I'm surrounded by pearl-clutching neurotic Democrats, God bless them, including my wife. And as a Trump-hating and public endorser of Kamala Harris, I'm part of the Bush, Romney, McCain alumni for Harris, although it's a character-building experience for a right-wing nut like me. People say, what can I do? What can I do? I say, move to Omaha. And I'm not kidding. 5,000 votes in Omaha can tell this election. That congressional district could be the deciding vote if Trump wins Georgia in the South, if the North Carolina thing, which is, if she wins North Carolina, she will have won the industrial Midwest and Georgia and potentially Nevada. That's like the cherry on top. It is a weird mathematical outcome, not impossible, but for her to win North Carolina and lose one of the other, 5 or 6. But that congressional district, the second district in Nebraska, which, by the way, is even a study of America in itself. You've got kind of hipster downtown Omaha, you've got a rural Trump farm county, and you got an Air Force base. And together, they're a 50-50 district. So I have a lot of Democratic friends where I want to go to Pennsylvania. I'm like, cheaper airfare, get to Omaha. Because people are missing how critical that can be. If he wins the 3 Sunbelt states and she wins the 3 metal benders and is able to pull off, Omaha will decide.
Yeah. So we're going to run out of time. I'm going to invite our audience to go to the Center for the Political Future website, easy to find at USC. Look at the amazing study groups that are going to be led by these fellows. I want to thank them for what was a terrific discussion, a great way to kick off the semester. And to the audience, I also want to invite you to watch our next event on September 12th at 3 p.m. on Zoom, where Mike and I will be analyzing the outcomes of the debate. And we'll see whether or not we agree. Thanks, and have a great rest of the week.